Chapter 24. The most metaphysical thing Mason will ever remember Dixon saying is, "I owe my existence to a pair of shoes." I owe my existence to a pair of shoes. His father, George Dixon, Senior, having ridden in late to quarterly meeting, a wet night, everyone gone to bed, a pile of shoes left out to be cleaned, in all the great quaquaversal array, he sees only the pair belonging to Mary Hunter. Without planning it, he has stooped, picked them up, pretending to move them back from the fire lest they dry and crack. Who would own a pair of shoes like that? Who'd have decided to wear them here to meeting? Fancies herself a bit too much. He'll have to find out, won't he? George can tell a good deal by a pair of shoes. As 'twas ever the custom, Easter Mondays in County Durham, he'd run about Staindrop with other boys of the fell to pull off the shoes of any girls they met, and keep them till redeemed with a gift. Older boys asked for a kiss. Younger boys were content with a sweet, which girls learned to carry a bag of with them upon that day. The minute he steps into breakfast next morning, so one day their daughter Elizabeth will come to believe, they spy each other. More likely he's been up before the first bird to ask the fellow cleaning all the shoes, finding out that she's Mary Hunter from Newcastle, to the relative who introduces them at last. "Something about thy shoes, Mary." "My shoes?" A direct gaze. George Dixon, out upon the road so much that he has left back at the stables any need in his conversation to dismount, canters ahead. "Last night I took the liberty of moving them back from the fire. I trust they're no worse for it." "Thou must ask them." He is on one knee in a flash, a hand in each shoe poised either side of his face, glancing up at her. "Well, how are thee?" He addresses one shoe. "Not too wet? Not too dry?" causing it to reply, "Quite well, thanks," in a high-pitched voice that draws the attention of a number of small children nearby. "Unless I am to be wet with tears of boredom or dry from too little time walking out, why aye," in his everyday voice. "And how's thy sister?" "Eh!" screeching back at himself in an ill-humoured ogress voice. "And have I started talking to gawks then?" shaking his own head. "I can't believe your sisters, the one so sweet, the other—" "Watch yourself, Geordie," warns the screechy one. Some children have come tottering over to look at the source of these voices. George Dixon may be too young to know trouble when he sees it, can't stop talking to himself. Some crazy enterpriser helpful relations murmur, with a wild cat coal operation out upon the fell, whilst others wag their heads in dazed, though not altogether comfortless unison. And before any of them know it, the couple are, as they say round Staindrop, "gannin' straits." They are already connected in the Durham Quaker web. Mary's mother having died, her father, Thomas Hunter, took a second wife, who also died, and then a third. 8 years after his own death, Mary passing under the protection of her uncle Jeremiah, the third wife and now widow Elizabeth got married again, this time to Ralph Dixon, George's father. So, taking off his hat and shaking out his hair, we've each had her for a stepmother. What's that make us then? Step-brother and step-sister-in-law? Yes, that is not the tale the neighbours have preferred to tell. They have it that Mamma, no sooner than my father died, married his father. So she married thy grandfather, making thy mother also thy grandmother. Not too much of that over in Weardale, I imagine. Step-grandmother, in fact. What would they do without hunter women? He is tying his hair back again with a brown gross-grain ribbon. She surprises herself by staring at his hands in their patient way with what has proved to be a notable cascade of hair. As it comes less and less to frame his face, she understands that he's doing this on purpose, for her, risking his unprotected face. Mary Hunter was nearly 18 when her father died, and she became the ward of her uncle, Jeremiah Hunter. He was 54 at the time. Think of it as a picturesque affliction, my dear. Oh, uncle. Did she remain his ward until she married George 12 years later? It must have been with Uncle Jeremiah in mind that she named her second son. George Senior, not altogether happy with the name, too scriptural, would clutch his head whenever the baby let out a peep, however good-naturedly, and exclaim, "Alas, the lamentations of Jeremiah." Whenever he heard these words, the baby would begin to give beef in earnest, and his mother grimly to smile. As George Jr. learned to talk, he added the phrase to a repertoire of teasing arts he was happy to share with his sister. The difficulty was that little Jeremiah assumed nearly all of this was being done to amuse him, for he loved the older children with an unqualified and undaunted certainty, despite the energy bordering upon vehemence with which they lifted, swung, or passed him, whilst inverted, one to the other, and their tales of ghosts and creatures of the fell, and the nicknaming, exclusions, and words kept secret from him. 'Twas all to the unreflective jelly-belly, as he was known. Huge fun. Neighbours came to think of his mother as the cleverest woman ever to marry a Dixon. She pretended, however, that George was the clever one. "He usually reads my mind," she told Elizabeth, "and if thou find an husband who's fooled as seldom, the happier thou'll be. It saves thee all the day in and day out effort of trying to fool him. Fetch me that, would you, beloved? And upon the few occasions when thou may fool him, why, it does wonders for thy confidence." "Thou've fooled him, really, mamma?" "Once or twice. Beware a man who admires thy shoes. Thou may love him to distraction, but at the same time thou'll wish to strongly to play tricks upon him, which, though of an innocent nature, carry with them chances for misunderstanding. 'Tis not a pastime for the young. I would urge thee, for example, to ease off upon the railton, lad, for the time being, and to concentrate upon thy sums. Remember, she who keepeth the books runneth the business. He's so... Yes. Oh, thou don't know. I know thee. A quick sweep of her palm down the girl's hair. I see that gawpy look. His father died when Jeremiah was 22, a fairly miserable stretch beginning for him then, though he never drank enough to interfere with field work, something he needed as much as ready access to ale. Still young enough to arise little inconvenienced after a night's strenuous drinking, having led till now the merry life of a journeyman surveyor. Errant all through the north country, one great land holding to another, three-legged staff cocked over his shoulder, circumferenter slung in a pitman's bag along with dry stockings and a small wheaten loaf, spare needles and pins, plummets, pencils, scrap paper and jeweller's putty for the compass. Those spaces not yet enclosed would ever make him uneasy, not a promising mental condition for an outdoor job. Obliged to cross the fell now and again, a dangerous and frightening place. Not only murderers abroad, but spirits as well, and spirits not necessarily in human form, no. The worst being in almost human form, but not quite. Now he longed only, late at night, whispering to the familiar floorboards, either to be killed or devoured out there, or to become one of them, predatory and forever unsheltered, either way transformed. He broke faith with everyone he knew, loans unhonoured, errands unrun, silences unkept. His older sister Hannah married a Yorkshireman but 3 months after their father's passing, and Jerry showed up at the wedding and made a spectacle of himself. "I'm but getting on with it, Jeremiah, and so ought thee. And who are thee to call me such things?" He was turning into a country lout, soon to be beyond reclamation. Elizabeth, tearful and broken, had headed directly for the comfort of her mother, both assumed into a silent, unapproachable cloud of mourning, the boys being left each to his own way of soldiering on, the enemy who had so unanswerably insulted them at their backs now somewhere and in and out of their sleep. George got busier than he had to be with one scheme and another, pulling greenstone out of the dike under Cockfield Fell, carving and fitting together stalks of humlock for another of his gas pipe schemes, redesigning the spur gearing or the pump seals out at the workings. Jeremiah found himself indoors, perfecting his draftsmanship, bending all day over the work table, grinding and mixing his own inks, siftings and splashings everywhere of King's yellow, azure, red orpiment, Indian lake, verdigris, indigo and umber, livigating, elutriating, mixing the gunpowder, pouncing and rosening the paper to prevent soak-through. Preparation he would have once rashly hurried round or in great part omitted, was now necessary, absolutely necessary to do right. He must, if one day called upon, produce an overhead view of a world that never was, in truth-like detail, one he had begun in silence to contrive, a map entirely within his mind, of a world he could escape to if he had to. If he had to, he would enter it entirely but never get lost, for he would have this map, and in it, spread below, would lie everything, Mountains of glass, sea of sand, miraculous springs, volcanoes, sacred cities, mile-deep chasm, serpent's cave, endless prairie, another chapbook fancy with each deviation and dip of the needle. When night fell, he would put his drafting things away back into their velvet nests and pear wood cases, and go out to the tiger or the greyhound, seeking men who had been friends of his father's, seeking somehow to nod and smile them into remembering. Much of the ale-born matiness others were to see in him was learned during this time, at great effort, a word, a gesture at a time. They told him often of things he didn't know or thought he didn't, of the coal business, Iliads of never quite straightforward dealings among owners, statesmen, collier masters and fitters, who might have owned a particular keel and who hadn't but said he did. 'Twas ever something, for whilst business Tyneside might be done by 1-year contracts and fixed fees, here upon the weir all was negotiable. Just before leaving for America, he spends as much time as he may at the Jolly Pitman, though now he is more likely to be the storyteller. Some are gone, yet are there some who say, "George would be proud of thee now. Will you come with wee Dodd and me on my keel, as you did last time, Jerry?" "Why, aye, Mr. Snow, and thank thee." So it is he now approaches the harbour, down the river widening out of darkness, into a dawn singing of statesmen and keel bullies. "How there! Eh, watcher!" The fleets of keels carried down and sailing upstream, the beamwork of the first staiths penned upon the sunrise, both sides of the river a rumble with the coal and the chutes and the coal-filled wagons upon the wood rails, the dyer's bath of morning, no redder than 2-penny beer, spilling across the world east of Chester Street, punctuated by the geometry of tunnels, bridges and earthwork embankments sizable as pyramids, the great inclined wagonways, whose tracks run from the Mineheads inland for miles down to the spouts upon Weir. America, waiting someplace, going out to the collier Mary and Meg, bound again for London River, riding atop the Huttock. Dixon sees fog, pale and shifting, approach like a great predatory worm. He has snickered at gin-shop tales of keelmen lost in the fog, never expecting any such mishap in his own life, having ever planned to spend as much of it as he may upon dry land. But here it comes, the flanks of the aqueous creature seething ever closer, as young Dodd the Paddy gives a shout of alarm, and Mr. Snow, in his post of keel bully, begins to swear vigorously. Already half the shoreline is obscured. Far away upon the shields a bellbuoy rings in the dank morning. And somewhere closer, upon now invisible rounds, yet goes the bell of the Tuggerine man, ship to ship, iron seeking iron, and then, like that, wrapped in the sulphurous signatures of fresh coal, have a score of savages appeared out of the sea fret, paddling pirogues, shouting strange jibber-jabber, the words incomprehensible, yet the vowels unmistakably North British. How to explain this? That wild Indian sounds a bit like poor old Cookie, don't it? They've painted themselves. Aye, black as coal dust. "How ye?" calls Mr. Snow. "What place is this?" "Why, you've floated to America, you buggers." Here, we'll 4 years in. America, eh? Eh, you gawks! A grappling hook, blackened and lethal, comes flying out of the fret, just missing young Dodd and catching the haddock. "They're attacking!" screams the Peddy, scrabbling in the coal. And just then, out there like hounds let loose, the church bells of America all begin to toll, peculiarly lucid in the fog, a dense carry-on, tuned so exotically they might be playing anything. Methodist hymns, opera hall airs, jigs and gweegs, work songs of sailors, Italian serenades, British ballads, American marches. "Now listen here, yes," the keel bully to forces invisible. "There's naught to fear from us, being but poor peaceable folk lost in this uncommon fret, who'll be only too pleased to gan with yes, wherever ye say," in a lower voice to his own. "They want the call. Let them find us." Carefully, sensing the tides through his soles, he steers them further into the obscurity. The others, keeping silent, may be anywhere. Snow reacts to every splash, every shift of whatever is flowing past. Soon the fog begins to clear. They seem to rock beneath the belfries of a great estuarial town. It smells like coal. Ordinary water birds coast above, quite at home. "Why, I believe they're Geordies as much as us," the keel bully exclaims. "Nor do they appear the faces of strangers. Yet where are keelmen ever as silent as these have now fallen? And why are the faces beneath these basin crops so unmovingly resentful? Snow and even little Dodd know them. Some stood before the assizes after the strikes of 43 and 50 and were sentenced to the gallows, though 'twas later said they were transported to America. Why, aye, if this be America, then here they are, in company with alehouse champions of legend carrying their blackjacks big as washing tubs, celebrated free-for-all heroes, keel races from the coaly Tyne, worshipped even Wearside. "Dobby, is it you? What cheer?" As if for Dixon every fizz a reel, every can bought and taken, and nocturnal voice lifted in harmony down his time, sooner or later would come to be reprised in this late day invisibility. And the fret, for a moment, has made possible some America no traveller's account has yet described, because as yet none has returned, though many be the mates and dear ones who abide. And when he sees the little collier brig at last, her sails not merely begrimed, but silken black with coal dust, the Mary and Meg, Dixon suffers a moment and a half of dread, for her stillness in the water, her evenness of trim in a light never seen upon the shields. Was it so the first time? Did he simply miss it with his mind then pitched so immoderately further east? Or is this a particular and strong message concerning America, meant not for him but for someone else, that he may only have got in the way of? It is dangerous passage along the coast down the Thames and into the Pool, turning ever to windward, often into the teeth of gales, among treacherous sands and the channels ever recurving, like great serpents astir, catching a windward tide at the King's Channel, beating up toward the Swin, keeping out of the swatchways and attending ever her soundings, the Mary and Meg, threading nicely among rocks, shallows, 1,000 other vessels, each bound its own way, desiring, despite her ghostly look, to live briskly whilst she may, brings Dixon at last to Longreach, above Gravesend, guided to her moorage in the Tear by the slowly rising dome of St. Paul's, to westward. Tomorrow he and Mason are to sign the contract.